The New Testament reading is from the Gospel of Luke, St. Luke, and it's chapter 24, starting at verse 36. While they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you troubled? Why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. The ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see I have." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and feet. And while they still did not believe it, because of joy and amazement, he asked them, "Do you have anything to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. He said to them, "This is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms." Then he opened their minds so they could understand the scriptures. He told them, "This is what is written. The Christ will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and repentance and forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things. I am going to send you what my Father has promised, and stay in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
There we go. Magic. Welcome. If you're visiting us today, you're really welcome. My name's Paul. I'm one of the ministers here at Immanuel. Especially welcome to the Ockwells and their family. I really enjoyed coming along and hearing your talks yesterday. So I hope that's reciprocated this morning. I know some of you have travelled some distance to be here, and I know it also means an awful lot to your mum and dad, because if we at Immanuel have to hear quite a lot about you, not in a bad way, but they talk a lot about their kids and their grandchildren. And so we were playing a game yesterday while I think kind of put names to faces, and actually, so which one's which, and trying to work out who does what job, because while we were at the tables, and we did really well actually. So many of you will know, if you're come to this church at any length of time, especially at a certain time of year, what my favourite book is, and I read it every year, other than the Bible, and I read that through every year as well. But my favourite book is, I think someone got it over here. Jill, it's A Christmas Carol by the Charles Dickens. I love it. It's a great book. I read it last Christmas, just as I was preparing to fly out to the Falkland Islands, it's a great book because it deals with issues of redemption, but what I love about it is that the more you read it and the more you sort of really wrestle with the text, you start to realize that Dickens actually writes so much of the Easter story into this Christmas narrative. And he sort of tells this message of Easter through this wonderful story of this miserly old guy called Scrooge. But the opening of the text starts with the simple phrase, "If Marley is dead." And the narrator, Dickens, as he's telling this story, explains that for the rest of it to be as wonderful and magical as it's going to be, you have to be able to understand that simple premise to start with, that Marley is dead. If you don't understand that, if you don't get that, if you don't believe that, what is about to be told won't be magical or won't be wonderful and mysterious and all of those things. And it's really important you get to grips with that. Well, strangely enough, I suspect he gets it from this passage or from the passage at the end of the Gospels, where for you to really understand the wonder of what is being said in this, you have to come to the belief that Jesus died. Jesus died on the cross. If you don't believe that to be true, then what is subsequently told in the Gospels will just not be wonderful, or not be magical, or not be mysterious, then it won't be life-changing. You have to have that basic premise for it to make any sense. And I was reading this passage the other day as we were preparing it, and you're thinking that Luke only has just a very small collection of stories post-resurrection in his gospel, and he goes on to tell a few more in the book of Acts. But actually, if you think about it, this is a really significant moment. It's not just a significant moment for these as disciples, but it's a significant moment for you. Whether you believe this to be true or not, this is a significant moment in history, because actually what happens here impacted the world massively. It impacted the world and culture and community and belief and values, especially in the Western context. Tom Holland, in his book Dominion, explains this, and he comes from agnostic point of view writing, and he sort of talks about this and says, actually, this story, these group of men and women, the post-resurrection, have gone on to have the greatest impact in culture and community throughout the world because of their message. And then Glenn Shrivner, there's a book at the back by him, he does write from a Christian point of view, goes on to explain it a little bit more, how our values are very much shaped by these group of people, men and women, who look the most unusual bunch of odd characters, who are uneducated. You would not choose these. If you had to pick people to make an impact in the world, you probably wouldn't pick the fishermen. These people, the outcasts, the odd people, the uneducated. And yet Jesus does. He picks these people and chooses them. And then we come to this passage here, and we sort of start to look at what Jesus is doing and look at the disciples. And I think we have this understanding that they're this great charismatic group of leaders that go out and change the world. And that's not the image we get of them here at all. These disciples are living in fear and doubt. And as you start to look at the Gospels and all four of the Gospels, you start to realize just how Jesus changes the life of these people and how stupid the men in the story really are. I read this and I started to have a bit of sympathy, and I'm sure if you're a teacher or if you have any responsibility of educating others, you've probably had moments like this where you try and teach something or you explain something and you look at them and there's a blank look of their face and you think, why don't they get it? I thought I've explained this really well. And then you set them some questions and you realize they have not understood a word you've just said, and you think, oh, I'm sure that's probably the pain teachers feel on a regular basis when they just don't get it. And these men are literally presented with the resurrected Jesus and they don't get it. They doubt, they fear, and they're not understanding it at all. And the Gospels are really good at painting that picture of the men, and yet paints a very different picture of the women. And I think this is the sort of wonderful nature of the Christian narrative, the Christian story, how it elevates the role of women in the story. Because all the gospel writers paint the women as much, much cleverer than the men. They get it straight away. They don't need it to be explained to them. They don't need a second lot of proof and evidence. They just believe what they see. They see Jesus and go, well, we get it. The men go, we don't believe that. We can see it with our eyes, but we don't believe it. I think, wow. And this is what we see here. The men, Jesus is right in front of them. And what you see in this story is Jesus is dealing with a very frightened bunch of people. They think he's a ghost. And that sets them on edge. I don't know if you've ever thought you've seen something a bit weird. We all have fears, don't we? I was looking through my Facebook screens the other day, and there was something that set me on edge just looking at a picture, and I thought, oh, that's just, can't do that. And it was 4 friends of mine that from a church that we used to go to long before we were even ordained. And they'd gone to this very, very, very tall tower. I don't know where it was in the world, but there was a viewing platform that had a glass bottom, like floor. And there was the 4 of them standing on this glass bottom floor with a glass behind them and then just nothing below them. That set me on edge. Because I can't stand, I have a huge fear of heights. I do not like that at all. And that set me on edge, just looking at it. And these disciples, you must all have those sort of strange fears and phobias. I don't like heights, I've just told you that. I don't like knives. I don't know where that comes from. I just can't stand. I'd be a rubbish doctor. I know we've got doctors and nurses here because scalpels freak me out as well. Ooh. I can cope with guns. I don't mind them at all. Can't cope with knives. Yeah, anyway. The disciples are really frightened and really scared. They think it's a ghost. Jesus comes to them and he gently, this is what I love about this story, he gently tries to meet them in their fears. Because Jesus recognizes we all have fears and we all have doubts. And he understands that, he gets that, he understands exactly where we're at. And he meets us where we're at. Jesus understands these people are really frightened. And he wants to gently meet them in their fear. And it's not wrong to be fearful. Nelson Mandela, he said, courage is not the absence of fear, but it's just the confidence to overcome it. So it's not wrong to be fearful. You just have to be able to overcome it. And Jesus wants them to get over their fears, and he wants to meet them in their doubts because they have questions. And what I see in this is they still leave with questions. They're still doubting what they're seeing. Even at the end of this, they still have questions. And it's okay to have questions about matters of faith. In fact, I'm more suspicious of people that come and say, I have no doubts or I have no questions. Because I think, do you? Well, I do. And I'd like you to explain some of these things to me because there's lots of questions I think this book throws up. And Jesus meets them in that, and he invests time in them, and he meets them and says, look, I want you to overcome these doubts. You doubt what you see. So let's deal with that. You think I'm a ghost, so come and touch me. Because in theory you can't touch ghosts. And he said, let's have some, and then he said, let's have something to eat because ghosts don't need to eat. So he meets them and talks around food, which is quite often the case with Jesus. He wants to do some teaching, and he's Jewish at the end of the day, isn't he? So where's the best place to do it? If a Jewish boy, you do it around food. You do it around the table, and so he cooks up some fish or has some fish cooked, broiled fish. It doesn't sound nice, but I'm not a fan of fish either. And he takes it and eats it in their presence to say, look, I'm not a ghost. So if I'm not a ghost, what is it you think you're seeing? Because they were already talking, because you get the bit right at the beginning that Richard read out, why they were talking about this. Well, what does that make you want to know? What were they talking about? That makes me want to know, because I'm just inquisitive like that. Well, if you were talking about something, what was it? And actually, if you look, then you have to go to the story before, and that's the road to Emmaus, where these 2 people are going along, looking really downcast, wondering what's just happened in Jerusalem, and then Jesus comes and walks alongside them. They don't recognize him, and they say, oh, Jesus says, why are you so upset? Why so gloomy? And he goes, have you not heard? This is what's happened. And he goes, oh, that's interesting. And they said, some women have said they've seen him, but obviously they don't believe. And they're walking along, and then eventually, again, over broken bread, they see Jesus. They get who it is. They recognize who it is. And so they come back, and they're telling their friends, and their friends don't believe it. So they have these men that have seen it on the road to Emmaus. They also have the story of the women that have seen it at the tomb, and these disciples are going, we don't believe it. And Jesus appears to them, and they think, oh, it's a ghost. So Jesus then meets them in their doubts and says, touch me. Touch me, let's eat. He wants to meet us in our doubts So I suppose the question is, what are the doubts you have? Some of you may doubt the whole story, because that's not where you're at in your journey of faith. Some of you may have other doubts. And it's okay for them to come to Jesus and say, I struggle with this. And then Jesus said, great, let's talk about it. Let's meet in the doubts. And to be honest, some of us will die with the same doubts. But Jesus does want to meet us and journey with us. This is a story of the gentleness of Jesus as well. He doesn't criticize them for not believing. He doesn't criticize them for doubting. He meets them where they are and lovingly wants to change. So God is the God of love. He wants them to change. He wants them to change because he needs them to go out and change the world. We know that they do because we're sitting here in a Western culture shaped by the beliefs of these, well, slightly more than 12, but men and women that go out and say, well, we saw the risen Jesus. He's alive. Now, I had the joy yesterday of being at the family gathering of the Ockwells and listening to their stories. And firstly, I want to say thank you for sharing the stories because story is what defines humanity. Narrative is really what shapes us as humans. It's the thing that really defines us as humans. It's us telling our stories. Whatever they are, it's what makes us human. And so listening to how you two came together, but what if you know the Ockwells at all, or you've spent any time with them, you realize actually family is really important because they talk about the families a lot. Sorry, they do. It's really important. It speaks volumes. It speaks volumes, and it spoke volumes yesterday. I really enjoyed. But what I like about it as well, and what it demonstrated yesterday, is this sort of concept that you get. I know we have a police officer here, but there's a principle in forensic science called Lockhardt's principle, that when two things come together, they leave bits of themselves on each other, and it rubs off. And I think that's forensic science teaches us that, but I think there's something sociological about that as well. That actually when people come together, we impact each other, we leave bits of our character on others, and we do that as part of our family. We shape each other in the way that we behave, it impacts others. And so listening to your boys talk after you, and then some of your grandchildren do some of them speak, you start to think, well, actually, you've impacted their lives because you see something of you in the way that they talk. And what's the most important thing is I think you see something of the love that they have for each other as family and for you. And I think that's because you have shaped that in them. And I think that's really important. Because I think that's what Jesus is doing with his disciples. He's meeting them in their doubts and he's showing them love. And he says, I want you to go and do the same. I want you to go and meet people in the doubts and show them love. Jeremy Vine I don't know if you listened to Jeremy Vine. A lot of people my age are starting to listening to Radio 4. I just can't make that leap. I'm still listening to Radio 2. I've moved on from Radio 1, but Radio 2. Jeremy Vine had this thing this week where people could phone up and share their school assembly. He called them school assembly bangers, which is a sort of a modern term for popular raging songs type things. I can't remember any of them being bangers as such, but we used to sing the Wombles song when I was at school. That's random, isn't it, for a school assembly? It's true. You tell that to my kids now and they look at you and go, the Wombles, who are they? They're the first eco-warriors. But there was a song that I was thinking about this as Jeremy Ryan was talking about, and people were phoning up, and there was a guy playing some of the sort of school assembly hymns and things that were very popular at the day. All Things B&B is probably a common one. But we used to sing this one about a magic penny. Did you get that? Thank you. Love is something if you give it away, was the core of the verse. Love is something if you give it away, give it away, give it away. Love is something if you give it away, you end up having more. It's just like a magic penny. I think, I don't know where they got that idea from, but anyway. Because that's the nature of love, isn't it? Love is best and only really demonstrated when you give it away. You give it away to other people. And Jesus is demonstrating love in the way he meets his disciples. He's not rebuking them with their doubts. He's not rebuking them with their fears. He meets them in love and says, guys, this is what's going to change the world. Not doctrine, but love. That is what's going to change the world. And as we see in the rest of this story, but then we just look at history, we see actually it has changed the world. It shaped our culture, it shaped our law, it shaped our community, it shaped our values. It's given us things like human rights. It's given us the laws of the land, a lot of them based on Christian values, the Judeo-Christian value and story. Well, at times the church is not being very good at demonstrating love. And if you've been hurt by the church in the past, then as a leader of the church, I apologize, because that's not what should have happened. Jesus only ever wants us to show love. It doesn't mean that he tolerates everything, but he does meet everyone in love exactly where they are. So I want us to celebrate with Andrew and Eileen the love that they have for each other, the love that they have for their family, the love they have for us, because they also spoke about us yesterday, which was nice as well. It's not just their immediate, family. So we're going to renew their vows in a minute, because 50 years, well done. We are on the hot on your heels. It's our wedding anniversary yesterday as well. We're only 23 years. She's not even here. She's away for a week. So I'm going to ask you to come up in a minute. We're going to go through in a minute. But there's one part of the service where we all get involved, okay? And this is best rehearsed because, quite frankly, if it's lame, when we do it for the real time, it sounds naff. So there is a part of the service where we say, will you, the family and friends of Andrew and Eileen, continue to support and uphold them in their marriage now and in the years to come? And the answer to this is very simply, we will. Okay? We're going to have one practice of this because you've got to just smash it out the park. Because they want to know that you're actually supporting them. So if it sounds as though you a little bit half-hearted, we'll do it again until you don't. So will you, the family and friends of Andrew and Eileen, continue to support and uphold them in their marriage now and in the years to come? We will. It's a good job you've got another attempt later in this, isn't it? Because you've got to get a little bit better than that. But family and friends, if you want to watch this, now's the opportunity to come. If you want to carry on doing crafts, then carry on doing crafts. I really don't mind. Andrew and Eileen, front and centre. I didn't know if you'd be wearing your wedding dress today, Eileen. This is the right side.